Radios, how do they work? Today I would like to talk about radios and the parts of them, but most importantly, the quality of them. Yeah, we don't have to change crystals anymore, although maybe some of y'all still have those radios. I ended up getting rid of all of mine because, it was pretty old. And it's not that they don't work, it's especially now, there's nobody that you're going to be interfering with. There's probably more interference on 2.4 gigahertz since everything is throwing off 2.0 gigahertz these days. But the radios seem to be really good at the rejection. It's not like the early days of Spectrum to where you could have like max 100 people and then you go to like a big event and it was just, everybody's getting swamped out. So kind of an aside there. But what I would like to talk about is the quality of radios and how that determines, in particular with a rock crawler, how your rig feels. So here's two essentially stock radios. This is the AX3, which is no longer provided with axial rigs, but it's a good example. And this is the Traxxas TQI that comes with all their rigs, all their crawling rigs at least, that have switchable diffs and 2 speeds and stuff like that. So AX3, really basic radio, actually felt really good, still feels really good, good trigger pull on it, decent. This here's your steering input, this little wheel. Your throttle input is going to be the trigger on here. Here's your antenna, which you really don't have to put up, but you can, back in the day is a cool thought, I guess. And then you've got a little bit of adjustment in here. So of course the on-off switch, the ultimate adjustment for it, whether it's going to work or not. But then we have a couple of little things too. We have our throttle reverse switch, which is hard to get to. We have our steering reverse switch, which is also hard to get to. There's a little bind button back here. And of course these two indicator lights letting us know what's going on. Then we have the steering dual rate, which is kind of like a cheap man's version of setting your endpoints. It's kind of useful, but usually I just crank those all the way up. We got our throttle trim, which is your neutral position on the throttle. That's very handy for letting an ESC arm, your motor speed controller, it needs to see a proper neutral to arm. And depending on which way your throttle is set, it may or may not want to arm with a normal neutral position. So I've got this one turned all the way to one side, it looks like. Then we've also got our steering trim, which is very handy for making sure that your rig goes straight when you're not steering it. And that's everything on the radio, besides your batteries in here. And they just use AA batteries. Most of them use 4 of them. And they last a really long time on this. I like to use this radio whenever I'm setting up a rig to see what a bad setup would be. Like, not necessarily the worst, because there are RTR radios out there which are far worse in throttle resolution than this guy. But this is kind of like a low cost. You can find them all over the place. There's people like me that just have them laying around in droves. So it's a really good indicator to me of how bad a setup may be, but also still be smooth. And your motor speed controller can really get around a lot of the unsmoothness of a trigger, although this trigger itself is pretty smooth. But there you go, there's the AX3. A pretty good one in my opinion. Maybe kind of hard to get a hold of these days, but something that I really like keeping around. Now, let's go to the TQI. This one has more features on it. It is actually lighter weight, even though it still uses 4 AA's in the base, but it's got the same things. You have your steering input here, which I've got a little thumb lever on. We'll talk about it here in a bit. Here is your throttle input, and I must say, these tend to wear out. The triggers just seem to, maybe you can hear. Let's see if you can hear that squeaky sound, that is the trigger not being smooth. So it's kind of like jiggling through its range when I pull it. And that makes it really hard to be smooth when you're driving. When you need just a little bit more trigger pull, it sticks, stiction is the proper term, and then goes through. Hard to get smooth. And it's really when it wears out. And I've put so many hours on this. So many hours on this. So it's kind of standard on these TQIs and all the TQs that the trigger gets unsmooth after a while. But your ESC, if you put a nice enough throttle curve, you can get plenty of low speed control. At least a throttle curve for Castle. For AM32, you would extend your sine range up a little bit, but really the AM32 seem to be smooth enough even with nothing done to them. Now, we can change these to have the neutral at a 50-50 or a 70-30 position. For rock crawlers, you always want 50-50. And with 70-30, it may not want to arm. Now, this one when it changes, it actually changes the trigger position itself. So your neutral position shouldn't change. But if you do need to change your neutral position for your throttle, you got to get into menus on this. This one also has a multi-function knob, which is typically set up. It's typically set up for cruise control on these radios when they come with their Traxxas crawlers. The next knob here is the steering trim. So it's really the only trim that you have available as an easy to find knob. So if your crawler isn't going straight, maybe you change your servo out or something from the factory is a little off, you would adjust that so that it goes straight. On this particular radio, we also have this 3-position switch up top, and this gives us unlocking and locking differentials on the TRX4, as well as your 3rd channel switch down here, which is only 2-position, and this gives us 1st and 2nd speed. If you're reusing this radio for something else, you could use this to, let's say, adjust your drag brake on the fly, something like that. I'm not really sure what else you could use it for as a 2-position switch. It's a little bit limited. 3-position you could use for like a winch and some other things like that. Maybe like a light controller, aftermarket light controller. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you have done with these radios. Now, this one has more in-depth programming. So we got a menu button and a set button, but you can't see anything. There's no screen. And there is a Bluetooth module that you can actually put in here and then use your phone to program it a little easier. But otherwise, you're going to be bumbling through menu button, set button, menu button, set button to get your things changed out. For example, if you want to reverse your throttle channel, which is really handy for some ESCs, then you hold down menu when you turn it on. Then I think you hit the set button once, and then you hit the menu button once, and then you hit the set button twice or something like that. Maybe I got that wrong. So don't program your radio based on that recommendation there. All right, off to this little section here. This is a lever that I just printed. It's got little like grippy nubs around the edges. Not sure if you can kind of see those, maybe you can. But the grippy nubs make sure that it doesn't move. It kind of gives a little compression on that. And this is just so I can drive one-handed, because I really like to drive one-handed a lot of times. If I'm competing, of course, I'm going to be on the rocks focused using 2 hands. But if I'm just kind of cruising around, then I want to be able to do this. And the stock radio, my thumb is not long enough. Nobody's thumb is really long enough to be comfortable on that. So I got this with a little extra whoop-de-doo on the end for grip and comfort. And you just drive it around one-handed. I would hold it down at my side and just, I've got my full range of motion here. We can go full steering. These are pretty handy. There's a lot of people that make those these days. And I was kind of early in the market, I guess you could say. And I also never sold them because, you know, it's one of those things, everybody's got a 3D printer, it seems, and I'm not trying to sell 3D prints for a living, but maybe I should. One more time, I'll tempt y'all with that and then probably never do it. So easy little 3D printed accessory. You can get ones that are like machined and everything. It's become an actual thing in the market to have these thumb levers. So low quality, high quality. This is the Radiomaster MT12. This is currently my favorite radio. It has lots on it. So the batteries, instead of using AA's, you can get AA kits for it, but I'm using a 5,000 milliamp hour 21700 or whatever y'all call them. Lithium batteries in there, 5 amp hour, 7.4 volt. It lasts a super long time. And this radio, you can actually just plug it straight into USB, and it has an internal charge controller. And I believe, yeah. So it's a 2-cell battery. You can probably see the charge port is actually where it plugs into the radio. So the radio handles the balancing of the 2 cells while it charges, which is pretty slick. That's, I don't know if that's an industry first. Y'all have to tell me in the comments about that. But the biggest issue with using lithiums on other radios in the past is that you had to pull it out and recharge it. It's not really an issue. That's not a big deal, honestly. But it was something that was kind of a pain in the butt. This one, USB port right there. Boom. You just plug in your USB, it charges itself up, and you're ready to go. Just like the other ones, here's your steering input, and here's your throttle input. The steering on this, let's see. Oh, it's a lot nicer feeling than that one. It's crisper than this one. Ooh, yeah, it does feel really nice. I'm not a racer though, so the actual steering itself is not my concern. I'm a crawler. Throttle, Ooh, throttle. That's my concern. And this, I mean, you can set your tension, for one. You can set your tension on here, but you can also set your neutral position. There's a little screw. You can set where your neutral position sits. And I haven't modified it any because I don't need to, but the buttery smoothness of this throttle is worlds above this one. It's got a finer spring on it, maybe, I don't know. Whatever it is, it feels a lot better. And then of course next to this one, I mean, again, maybe you can hear the creaking of this trigger. There is no creaking on this trigger, and as fine adjustment as you want, it'll do it, and it actually moves. So easy to use as compared to the other ones, particularly the Traxxas. This one's not bad. It's really not bad. But this, I love it. Now, this one has a lot of bells and whistles. So we've got a multifunction knob here. We've got a multifunction knob here. We have a click up and down there. So essentially a 3-position switch, another 3-position, another 3-position, and another 3-position, and another 3-position right there. Then we have a single button right there. We have a 2-position switch hiding down here. We have a single position switch hiding right there. We have a scroll wheel, which you can reassign to do whatever you want to. It probably presses down, hey, it's another switch. And then we have all of our programming switches. But this one, instead of programming it, oh, you gotta hold it down. Instead of programming it with like a blind menu, you can actually see what you're doing in here. So we can go through different pages. Maybe you can see that on the overhead. It's kind of hard to make sure that that shows up, but there's so much information in these radios, and honestly the MT12s aren't that expensive comparatively. If you're going to buy one of these used on eBay, yeah, sure, you can get it for pretty cheap, but if you spend another $100 or so, then you have one that has so many functions and mixings and like anything that you want to use it on, whether it be a crawler or a racer or anything like that, you can. And so it's more of an investment for the future to get a radio like this. Now there's some other features that I don't even know what they are. I think you may be able to make this a left-handed radio potentially. It looks like it. I'm right-handed. Oh yeah, I forgot about this button. There's one hiding up in there too. There's just buttons all over. And you can change out your modules. This radio is just ultra powerful, but the biggest reason why I would use it in a crawler especially is because of that smooth trigger. And you can just set it up and bind it and go and not worry about any of all the other features, but you can also set it up for having a 2-speed or your diffs. If you got a TRX4 that needs a new radio, you can set it up for all of that, and I mean, there's almost infinite programming on this. It can be difficult to get into at first. That is the one downside on a radio like this, is that it can be a little bit of a learning curve, a lot of a learning curve to get into it properly. But fortunately, there's a lot of videos out there that will step you through it, and maybe written. I think this is the one thing that I actually do prefer videos on, because you can see what the screen's doing and make sure you're following along. When it is just printed instructions, it might not be exactly what you're trying to do. Whereas if it's a video, you search for one specific function, MT12 3-position switch 2-speed or something like that, and it will come up. If somebody's done it, it will come up. So yeah, there's the downside of the complications of this, but there's the upside of being able to make it work for anything. So that's the basics of a radio. The reasons why I would want to upgrade a radio, the feel, especially of that trigger right there, is my biggest concern in a crawler. But for go fast, for racing in particular, you may really want that buttery smooth steering wheel on there. And some of them are smoother than others. There's a lot of stiction in that one. This one only rattles back and forth because I got the extra weight on there. And this one, a very light spring, but a very nice centering. You know, the buzz is not what you're going for, but you can hear the crispness maybe as compared to the other ones. It's thump and that's what I think. So there we go, radios. Maybe that answers a couple of questions about radios, and at least why I would want to use a nicer radio on things whenever possible. But again, A lot of times I'll use these radios when I'm testing new equipment because I want to know what the average user that has a less expensive radio is going to have for their experience. So it's really handy for me to have these around. If you do have any further questions, leave them down below. And if you've got your own comments about radios, leave them as well, because I want to hear what your opinions are on them. And I'm sure everybody else in the comments also would like to hear those. As always, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. You've made it to the end of the video. Hopefully that means you liked what you saw. If you want to help out the channel, you can like, subscribe, and definitely comment down below. We would like to hear new ideas from you, so be sure you let us know what you'd like to see. There are some other suggestions probably floating by my head right now that you can check out, and otherwise we appreciate your support and your help growing the channel.